What do you envision will be the future of the enterprise or utility space and technology over the next 5 to 10 years? 5 words or less.
I would say, real-time insights, proactive operations.
So right to 5 words.
Or less, right?
Yeah.
I would just say components of grid modernization.
Okay, components of grid modernization. Ira.
From my standpoint, I guess expanded access.
Joe?
Data-enabled grid interactions.
Grid interactions. Ugo.
Yeah, from our lens, it would be essential for planning and operations.
Now we'll just figure it out once we're up there. Yeah. All right. I'm going to go down this end. You just sit wherever. It doesn't matter. Yeah, I'll just grab this one.
Okay.
Yeah.
How you doing?
Hi.
Thank you.
I'm Kelt. Hi.
Yeah.
Trey Bush. How are you? Nice to meet you.
All right. I'm going to pull this one up. All right. Well, these are low, huh? Yeah. All right. Good morning, everyone. Heather and Clint, Karen, that was awesome. I think there's a lot of uncertainty brewing, and I really enjoyed that, so I appreciate it. All right, so we're going to pivot right into content, right? So the theme of the entire event is grid evolution from pilot to scale, and we have a really interesting, august panel here that represents sort of a few elements, sort of a cross-section of the utility sector. So I'll start this, and we'll just do a quick introduction, and then we're just going to dive right into a few rapid-fire questions. So immediately to my right is Greg White, and Greg is the outgoing executive director of NARUC after 9 years. 9 years sort of leading our public utility commissioners, and has had a wonderful run. Next to Greg is, the goal here with GridWise obviously is to be proactive with policymakers. So I think for the first time, we have a leader from the Federal Communications Commission here. Ira Keltz is the acting chief of the Office of Engineering and Technology, and part of the goal with this panel, Ira, I don't even think you know this, I didn't even really share this with you, but it's to really begin a proactive, positive dialogue with the FCC and with the agency. So thank you, Ira, for joining us. To Ira's right, we have Joe Walsh. Joe is the Vice President of Smart Grid Advisory and Networks at NRTC, who is really leading sort of the technology evolution of our co-op community. And then to his right is Ugo Mena, and Ugo is the Chief Growth Officer of Electric Power Engineers. So really neat cross-section of the energy sector. So I'm going to start. We might as well just go down the line. Rapid fire question, 5 words or less, no cheating. First question is, what comes to mind when I say digitization? I can't even say it. What comes to mind when I say digitization, data, and communications? Just go right to 5 words.
Or less, right?
Yeah.
I would just say components of grid modernization.
Okay, components of grid modernization. Ira.
From my standpoint, I guess expanded access.
Joe?
Data-enabled grid interactions.
Data-enabled grid interactions. Ugo?
Yeah, from our lens, it would be essential for planning and operations.
Okay, all right, good. So now we have an underpinning. So there's going to be a lot of discussion over today and into tomorrow, obviously about AI. So the first person on the panel who mentions AI gets a demerit. But what underpins?
I think that was you.
I know, right. That's why I'll give myself multiple demerits. But the underpinning of AI, right? AI is an analytical tool, right? We're going to talk about it. It's a key component of the modernization of the grid, modernization of any enterprise operations, but it's contingent on data, right? It doesn't work without data capture. So we're gonna talk more about the technology evolution and about the influx of data. And so next rapid fire question, and Ugo, we're gonna start down with you. What do you envision will be the future of the enterprise or utility space and technology over the next 5 to 10 years? 5 words or less.
I would say, real-time insights, proactive operations.
So I have to change mine now. But really, I would say granular grid operations.
Okay. Ira.
Again, I would repeat the, more real-time data, sensors, IoT build out. That was 5 words.
Okay.
I'll stop.
Greg?
I would say significant investment in infrastructure and technology.
Okay, good. There are definitely, I think you've all read the follow-on questions because you created a thread through to each of them. So, Ira, we're going to start with you and go dive down a little bit deeper. For those of you who don't know Ira, an incredible asset to the technology community. It's been at the FCC for a long time, understands the intersection of technology and policy, and is one of the sort of leading problem solvers in the telecom and technology space. So, Ira, we're going to start with you and just give a little insight as to what you're seeing from an increased or a new laserish focus on telecom and technology from the enterprise space, from the utility space. Is there a new focus that you're seeing?
Sure, Chris. So first, I have to say, this is kind of a bit of a full circle. I think the very first ever speaking opportunity I had from the commission was for Utilities Telecommunications Council when they still went by that name. And that was back in 1995. So been around quite a while. I'm starting to feel old. But to your question, I think on the enterprise space, particularly utilities, I don't think it's any different than any other industry. Everybody wants more connectivity. Everybody's trying to get connected, hooked up in any way possible. And we're just seeing that increase across the board. One of the interesting things with the telecom space, similar to the electric space and the grid, is pretty much every sector of the economy, every business in the country relies on electricity and connectivity, internet, or whatever it is in order to function today. So, we are focused on, how do we make that happen? How do we enable that for all the various needs, across the board? And I try to think of it as creating options and opportunities. Basically options for people to get connected in different ways. How can we enable that? And opportunities, again, to be able to have choice in matching up the needs to what works best. But again, I just think the needs, especially this community, I know, IoT is growing, smart grid and more sensors, and again, back to the IoT, SCADA type of applications, and just across the board. I know it's increasing. I've talked to utility companies over the years, and we are aware, and we're trying to do what we can. Both utilities, the entire enterprise space, but just everywhere in the U.S.
And Ira, you and I obviously have had many conversations, but including one this morning about the utility sector is obviously extraordinarily important, but not unique, right? You just referenced that, right? You are seeing this focus across all of enterprise, right? And is there a way that we can have, or is there a differentiation between or among utilities as compared to the rest of enterprise? Or does the sector have to look at itself as, evolving, but one of the many enterprise sectors that are evolving?
So, I think the utility industry is a little unique compared to other enterprise because it does reach pretty much everywhere across the country. We connect every home, every business, and so forth. So between that and then obviously probably a higher level of security needs, for those communications links. So there are unique aspects, just as there are for any business and any sector of the economy. And then there are some similarities too, just in the tools available, because there's only a finite set so far, and we're still, things are being developed, which is good. So I think the biggest thing is making sure that the folks at the FCC, including me, my bosses, the commissioners, come in, talk to them, make sure they fully understand your requirements and what it is you need and why it's so important that you need them. Because the change we've seen over, as I said, talking to UTC, almost 30 years ago to today, at that point, we didn't have the broadband networks we have today. We were still sort of siloed, and the utility company had their own pool of frequencies, for land mobile, and they could do what they wanted with them. That doesn't exist anymore. The entire landscape has changed, and with that, the thinking of how the networks and how those requirements are met needs to change with it.
Yeah. So we'll go. EPE has been around for more than 50 years. You guys have been at the intersection of the consistent evolution of the grid. Looking at the sort of the title of this panel, data and digitization, what role is it going to play? What are you seeing and your team of engineers seeing it play in the evolution? And where do you think it goes from here?
Yeah, so, data and digitization, it's a foundation for grid modernization and for kind of the future of planning and operations. I always go back where we used to do, long-range planning for some of our co-ops clients, and every time we would get the information from their old GIS system, as engineers, we had to go through and essentially almost recreate the model because there was no connectivity. And so we tended to spend a lot more time fixing the model than actually running the simulations that we needed to run to be able to come up with the 5, 10, future planning for their expansion. And so these days, with how load is rapidly changing and some of the things that we're facing, we're not going to be able to continue to do planning the way we used to. We need to have more access to data. We need to have more visibility as to what's happening. We need to be able to have the right communication systems that are going to allow planners and operators to make the right decision, to make the right recommendations. And then also keeping in mind that with DERs, with electrification, not only EVs, but also electrification of buildings and so on, we're going to be able to have a more flexible grid. We're going to have options to not only plan the grid better, but operate it more effective and efficient. And so one of the projects that we've done for one of our utility clients in the East Coast is that the PUC allowed them through legislation to control the inverters, and the DERs at the different residential and commercial loads. And so we helped that client build up that initial, let's say, pilot program from the ground up to then show it to the PUC how they can better run and operate their distribution network more effective, more efficient, so that they can integrate more distributed energy resources with the same system, right? But then that allows them to, manage the inverters, manage, how much that particular, let's say, home or commercial building is producing at a particular time, so that they can control better the grid. And so that pilot kind of ended recently. We presented in front of the PUC. And so, to the topic of the conference, now we're moving on to the next stage. So we finish up the pilot. We show that the program works. And so we're going to start implementing it further to other substations so that we can integrate more DERs and then run our, that client's grid more effective, more efficient.
Perfect. So for those of you who don't know, Anterix is a wireless broadband company. We're serving the utility sector, helping to drive wireless broadband. And so we've got a few team members here. I'm wondering if anyone just taped what Ugo just said, because I think it's a commercial for the need for advanced communications. Joe, Anterix just entered into an agreement with NRTC, but simultaneously you entered into an agreement with Southern Link and Southern for a hosted core, and with Ericsson to help provide. So you want to talk a little bit about what drove you to that, right? Is it data? Is it digitization? Is it the need for advanced communications? What are you seeing from your co-op members, expansive co-op membership about this evolution?
Yeah, and for people who are not familiar with co-ops, once you get outside of the major cities, power is provided by essentially mom and pop operations. It can be anywhere from, I think our smallest member is probably somewhere around 3,000 meters up to about 315,000 meters. So a little bit smaller than Dominion, but we have the same challenges. And to some extent, they're more exasperated. And I'll give you a great example of this. I was working with a co-op out in Oregon, and they had a red flag day, high winds, dry forest, and so they had to go through and do a PSPS, a public safety power shutoff for 36 hours. And the reason why they had to do that is we did not have the connectivity, we did not have the intelligent devices out to be more surgical in terms of what we were doing. We couldn't automatically change the settings. And the alternative is driving out across multiple hours of feeders, changing all of the devices one by one. That doesn't work. So the result is you shut the power off at all of your substations. 36 hours. And so you sit down and you start talking. It's like, so your people were without power on a blue sky day for 36 hours. Aren't all your people on well water? Yeah. And you see that in their, in their face, that this is really hard. And so we have these challenges, and so, yes, we can get the intelligent devices out there, but we need to have the good connectivity. Unlike in the big cities, we have communications deserts. Working with a co-op out in Idaho, 43% of their territory has no cellular coverage at all. And so we need to close these coverage gaps. We need to hit that security, and we also need to have the reliability. One of the things that we're also seeing is, I've been working with co-ops, now for about 5 years. I used to think that there was enterprise grade and carrier grade. I now realize there is a utility grade. And Hurricane Helene really kind of showed us this. When you look at all of the commercial carriers that were down for many days up to a week or more, versus what the utility in the area, Southern Company, they lost a couple cell sites, but they were down for a day and they were back up and running. We need to make sure that we have that. All of the same problems that the big utilities have, the little guys have, and we're looking at, we solve that through partnerships. It's going to be partnerships with spectrum providers like Anterix, with some of the infrastructure providers, and with other utilities to be able to close those gaps.
And Joe, part of correct me if I'm wrong, but part of what you and your team does is you bring scale to the co-op, to their purchasing, to their R&D.
Yeah.
And I think that is where you can put yourselves on a level footing with Dominion and some of the other bigger ones.
Yeah, and I have no illusion. You walk into Alabama Power. I was on the 9th floor. There were more people on that 9th floor than there were in most of the co-ops, in the entire state. But yeah, we'll bring the scale. We'll bring the partnership capabilities, and we also bring a lot of the knowledge into the organizations. How do we go through and get that data and start using it? I can't tell you the number of times you start out with, so let's see your GIS data. This says you have X number of substations. Don't you have Y? And you have to go through and do that. And then that also kind of gets into probably the third leg of the stool. Once we start talking about the technology and the data, you got to have the processes in place to be able to leverage it. So we try to help with that.
So Greg, let's pull it back a little bit. Your constituents, former-ish constituents, are going to preside over a lot of the core decisions about evolving the grid. So how do we ensure that they are aware of the necessity for this evolution, which obviously will include investment?
Sure. No, absolutely. State public utility commissioners are very aware of their critical role in the energy and utility space, and they're constantly learning. I don't have to tell you this, but the industry for the first 100 years was very much the same, vertically integrated, single companies. That is not at all the case anymore. The transition, which is being led by a lot of the states, into a more modernized grid, into a cleaner energy economy, they understand that they are critically important in that role. NARUC has a lot of projects and educational programming that we do, largely led by our Center for Partnerships and Innovation, which is led by Danielle Sass-Burnett, who's here. And we do in-person trainings, we do virtual trainings, we do webinars, we do workshops where we're looking at how do we kind of set the table for understanding where these investments are critical. And so that's just a really important part of what we do. I would argue that the educational component of NARUC is the most important thing that we do. At the same time, I want to really emphasize commissions base their decisions on the merits of the case, the record that's built in front of them. They then consider the merits and apply the law. And so it's so important to have the intervening community part of that process. As a former state commissioner, I was a commissioner in the state of Michigan, I was often frustrated by what was not in the case. In other words, how can I make a decision when this isn't in the case? I can't bring it in myself. And so I would argue, where are these parts? How come this hasn't been introduced into this case? Because it limits my ability to make a decision if it's not in the record. So the people in this room, not only by looking for opportunities to have time with commissions to talk to them about the technologies and the things that you all are doing, but also participating in the cases to put these kinds of issues onto the record that then gives the commissions the opportunity to consider them. That's a really important part of this process as well.
That's great, and I think, and we're going to unpack that a little bit in a few minutes. But I think the education component is going to be obviously key as we see the evolution. So I'm going to come right back to you, and we're going to go down the line. But as we talk about new sensors and new devices, we talk about that two words that I'm not allowed to talk about, or I give myself a demerit. But we talk about sort of data collection and the explosion of sort of real-time access. What do we have to do as a community, as a country, as a sector, to ensure that we're prepared for that? New streams, new pools of data, new analysis of data, new action on it. How do we ensure that each of your individual worlds are prepared, and then collectively the sector is prepared?
Well, certainly, we need to make sure that people understand how to use the data. That's probably the number one as far as I'm concerned. The volumes of data that are coming into the utilities through a lot of the technology that we now have is overwhelming to the utilities to a large degree. You're receiving information that you've never received before. Trying to figure out how to apply that, how to analyze it, how to apply that, I think is something that we really need to focus on.
Yep. Ira?
So, I think, from my standpoint, again, I'm not in the utility business. I don't do that. But from where I sit and I kind of think about it, and what really struck me is some of what Joe had said about, going out to some of these rural areas and some of these co-ops, and they're cellular deserts and there's no connectivity. And that's kind of the thing we've been trying to work on, both for those sectors, but also make sure other areas, everybody's connected. And through the government, there are a couple programs. There's a broadband connectivity fund. I think NTIA, which is, if you're not familiar, another agency under Department of Commerce. So the FCC regulates private sector use of of spectrum, NTI does federal sector. And then we work together on a lot of stuff. But under Department of Commerce, and they also administer a program. We've got a mapping program also. There's a really cool app you can download where you can send in data as you drive around, so we get a better sense of where people are connected or not. But that said, the telecom sector is really an enabler for you guys to do everything else you need to do, which is deliver energy to businesses, to homes and whatnot. And when I think about it, and as I said earlier, things used to be kind of siloed. We kind of went away from that, tried to be more flexible. And there are pros and cons to that, like everything else. There's trade-offs. And on the one sense, the utility folks had a set of frequencies. They can do what they wanted, set their own networks up. And I get it where, with the hurricane and some of the networks went down, and the telecom companies, the carriers, may not have the same incentive to get certain cells up as fast, for the connectivity, which is why you want to control your own networks. And then I think you got to find the balance. So I would think, and again, without having deep knowledge, that to just get things up and running, it might be a smaller set of what's necessary than that full set of data suite that you might have, when everything's great. So it's almost like starting to look at a mix of things. Can we use the commercial grid? We got 5G. 5G has network slicing. They can provide provision service just for utilities, but that again assumes you have connectivity. We have other things we've done. We have our citizens broadband radio service, which allows people to actually create, build their own systems in small areas. You connect to a database that tells you what spectrum is available at any given time. In the rural areas, there's plenty of availability, so it's definitely an option. We've got satellites now. You got Starlink. You've got Kuiper, a competing system. Hopefully, it gets up soon to compete. The Commission recently did what we called supplemental connectivity from space to allow the satellites to also serve on the terrestrial networks, the same frequencies used by Verizon, T-Mo, AT&T, using your handset with no modification at all. That provides a tremendous tool for flexibility to get out to these areas, because satellites cover everywhere, even if you don't have a tower on the ground. So that's, again, it's options, opportunities, and thinking, I think, creatively over what are the things that are available, how do we bring them into the arsenal so that we have lots of arrows in that quiver and can pull what we need when we need it, and make sure that the specific needs of this sector are met.
Joe?
Yeah, I think I was 100% right in terms of we have so many different technologies, and one of the things that always drives me batty is when people assume that technology is going to be exactly the same, or they look at one area, this is going to expand, but they forget that the other one is as well. And yes, compute power is going to get much better. We're going to get more data in. But guess what? The communications networks are going to evolve as well. And I do see a lot of these, these components kind of coming into play. I think one of the advantages that we also have, in addition to working with the about 850 or so rural electric cooperatives, we also are kind of a technology extension for about 600 rural telcos. And through the partnerships with some of those, it allows us to kind of do things that expand out the connectivity for the community, closing some of those data communications gaps, and have the reliability that we need for the grid at the same time. And I see, more and more partnerships as driving for rural America, the better connectivity that we need, and anything that we can do that will facilitate and urge companies to partner up to solve some of these problems. That's money well spent.
So Ugo, I'm going to ask you to answer that question, but I'm going to layer on something sort of in addition, right? I think we all recognize that the sector is facing an incredible and a new reality, right? Not only load growth that we've talked about, and I'm sure will be talked about throughout the next 48 hours, but more intense, more frequent weather events, more sophisticated cyber incursions, a continuing call, whether it's at the federal level or perhaps at the state level for decarbonization, data centers, and all of a sudden you drop something, and Joe, I know some of your co-op members all of a sudden wake up one morning and they have a request for a data center in their area that can double the load in a nanosecond, right? So when we think about that new reality, Ugo, and then we also look at the influx of data, do you think your customers are ready, the utilities are ready, and sort of how do you educate them?
Yeah, and so certainly our clients are navigating through all these changes, right? There are some that let's say are ahead of others, that are innovating, that are being creative about how they approach the changes that are happening. Others are more laggards, and it could be a various of reason. Maybe they're a very, very small co-op in a rural area where really they don't have the manpower or the resources to be able to implement some of these tools. And so as technology progresses, we need to make sure that these technologies are also affordable to a group of utilities in the U.S. that may not have the debt and the balance sheet that others do. Now, but that spectrum is big. I mean, we have clients that have a lot of data, right? They have some of these systems, but really that data is sitting in a data warehouse, and really no insights is coming out of that information. You have systems that are, even though they're well, let's say, integrated independently, they're not interconnected. So you can have DERMS and ADMSs that may not communicate with each other, and so operators need to go from one place to the other to then get their insights and make a decision. And so as we look into the future, there are several things that we have to keep in mind. Is first, the interconnectivity of the different systems that we have. So AMI data and the data historians of that system, the ADMSs, the DERMS. And so how do we integrate and get the right insights and the right information as fast as possible for operators so that they can make the right decisions, right? I think Mark mentioned earlier that in the United Power territory, they've installed battery energy storage systems, right? How do we use those systems so that the co-op and the utility is maximizing the output of it, meaning that they're lowering their cost of operation, that they're dispatching those resources when they need to, and that overall at the end their members are benefiting from those efforts, and the system is more reliable, more resilient, and affordable, right? So, but there's one thing for all of us to keep in mind is, given the cyber threats that we're all facing, these systems have to be very secure. I think, Joe, you mentioned they have to be utility grade, right? And so that's a terminology, right, that we maybe in this room know, because we build transmission, we build double circuits. Downtown networks have redundant loop systems, but we need to take that into account when we're developing these technologies, when we're building these communication systems for the utility network, so that they're very resilient, they're able to provide the data that we need, and then we go and do the necessary insights. So again, that we can have more real-time insights, and then we can have more effective and efficient operations.
Thank you. And a word you mentioned a couple times in two different contexts, both with regard to utilities and to customers, is affordability, right? And I think we've all heard the word affordability used in the context of the evolution of the grid and our offerings to our customers. And we've also heard the term or phrase energy equity, right? And but at the same time, Greg, I think we've heard, and I think you're going to hear over the next 2 days, the need for us to invest our way out of some of these problems and to face this new reality. So how do we balance that, and how the public utility commissioners balance that, right? Because if they come in and the primary is affordability, then you lose out on energy equity, right? You don't push the new technologies out to the edges to, as Joe said, there is a lot of co-op territory that has no communications connectivity right now. So how do we balance that?
So, I mentioned it earlier, the industry's changed dramatically, and historically, the investments that were made at the utilities tended to be very long-lived investments that would, when they were built, they were intended to last anywhere from 30 to 60 years. Meters, power plants, transmission lines, things like that were long-lived investments. A lot of the investments that are coming before the commissions these days are very technological, and their expected life is a matter of years as opposed to, tens of years. And so that's a big challenge. The commissions want to make sure that what they're approving, these investments are significant. The dollars are going up, right? They want to make sure that these are durable, that these are going to be, good investments that are going to last over time. So that's some of the challenge. But then again, that goes to where we're talking about the educational component, ensuring that our members understand the technologies and understand where it fits in the grand scheme of things, and that will help them make those decisions. Because I think, at least for somebody like me, who I would consider myself an old timer at this point, I'm from that era when we approved power plants for 50 to 60 years. We, improved transmission line investments. Meters were expected to last, 30, 40, 50 years. Nowadays, meters, I know I approved meters when I was on the commission that had a design life of maybe 5 to 10 years at most. We hoped that there was compartmentability, that they could, upgrade and things like that, but it didn't always exist. So that's, just getting our members to really understand the technology, understand where it fits into the grand scheme of the energy ecosystem, I think is probably the most important thing that we can do.
Yep. Ira, what can the sector do better from an advocacy, from an education perspective?
So I think the sector's already pretty good. I mean, at least from a standpoint of the associated UTC, they are very active in many of our proceedings, as are some of the individual companies. But, and I realize telecom's not necessarily your focus, it's not your business, but as, it is a very important part as an enabler. You can't make everything else happen without that connectivity. So it kind of expands the focus. You kind of need to pay attention to what's happening at the commission and take part in our proceedings. I mean, everything is done publicly, and come in and talk to us. Our new chairman coming in, Chairman Carr, will take over after on the 20th. I know he loves to travel around the country and get out, talk to people. Get on his schedule. Make sure he's aware of what your specific needs are. I don't think you necessarily have to do anything all that different, but just keep doing it and stay focused on engaging with the commission. I know in my office we're always willing to meet with pretty much anybody to understand what the needs are, so we can better do our jobs of making making sure they have the connectivity they need.
Joe, Ira, thank you. And incoming Chairman Carr, as Ira mentioned, is a really, first of all, very, very competent and intelligent guy, but also a hands-on person, like literally puts the helmet on and climbs towers, which I find really disturbing. But, like literally will climb up towers and tries to sort of enable and facilitate investment all the way down to, to the education of folks who will need to climb towers and help enable and facilitate this evolution. Joe, how do we make sure, I'll use the word troubling. I mean, I find it troubling that the solution to a potential energy-caused problem, electricity-caused problem, is just to shut off power. What is the way, and Ugo, I'm going to ask you to follow up with what Joe's answer, but how do we ensure that's not the primary tool in the toolbox?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and I think you asked what are the questions, and my answer was granular grid operations, and that really was in my mind thinking through that. Old days, great, I controlled things at the substations, then I push it out to downline devices. We're moving into an era where we're now talking about inverters behind a meter, different energy resources that we can control on a very granular level. And a great example of this is thinking about water heaters. At the end of the day, they're super big batteries. They're a wonderful tool to be able to leverage to either suck up or reduce load on the system. Well, guess what? We now have all of these solar generation facilities, and you know something? A big cloud goes across one of those farms, the production goes down. So once I start getting much more granular control, we're not anywhere near this yet, but just thinking out 10 years from now, being able to cycle off water heaters that are along the feeder so that I don't have to import in energy from elsewhere to make up for that cloud coming down. This is the direction that we're heading. We've got a long way to go to get there, but I think really pushing that out and those technologies, so it's going to be getting intelligent devices out in the field, getting the connectivity in place to be able to get the data off of them. Got to make sure it's good data. And then getting the processes and procedures to then be able to leverage that data. And that's going to be understanding what I have, but it's also what other data do I need in order to make what I have much more valuable.
Yeah.
When I was listening to the last panel, and one of the questions that popped up was, hey, we want to win at AI.
Demerting.
And my dumb former consultant brain starts going, okay, how do you quantify that? What are we measuring on that? And I think one of the things is really, one of the linchpins to winning that and making it more valuable for us is having sources of data that we can then leverage that are clean, that are actionable, that I can analyze, and being able to marry that up with my data to make better decisions. So long way around, starting out with the devices, the communications, the data, the processes, and then the additional data to start making decisions.
Yeah. Ugo.
I mean, Joe made a great statement on all the different levels. I'm going to take it kind of more and maybe add on to the fact that, today we have the ability to have cloud-based tools that can integrate with all these different, the SCADA system, the AMI data, the sensors. We may not have all the sensors out there that we need. And so where we're a little bit lacking is, from my point of view, is on the integration of all the data sources, right? How can we take those data sources and make meaningful decisions? And so, one of the tools that we use that we've essentially developed in-house is called NRI, and essentially is an Esri-based, cloud-based tool that sits on the Esri database of our clients. And so we read off the Esri base, we build the electrical model from it, and then we connect the SCADA system, we connect the AMI, system.